Oh, by the way, you guys might not know this, but last week there was a hypnotist. He convinced me that I was a soft, malleable metal with an atomic number of 82. I'm easily led.
Boom.
Oh, I love it.
Hi, I'm Christine.
And I'm Randy, and we took a left at the valley.
I know we shouldn't have to scream that we're atheists. You know, we don't have non-astrologers and all that. But with the religious people taking over the world, I mean, we can either speak up or be pushed into a corner.
I'm proud to be an atheist, a skeptic, a non-believer, an infidel, a heathen. I call it how I see it. I say it's ignorance and you just call it faith and unsubstantiated claims. That's something to be ashamed. I'm an atheist.
Coming at you from another secret location. This is Left of the Valley. My name is Kevin, and I always wondered if a cow laughed, would milk come out of its nose? Joining me as usual is a team that wonders why are there 5 syllables in the word monosyllabic. She installed a skylight in her condo. The people that live above her are furious. Nancy.
My mind was still on how utterly ridiculous that statement about the cow was. I was living in the past. Happy Mother's Day to everybody.
And he asked me last week if he needed a silencer to shoot a mime. Scott.
Oh, that's horrible. And why is there light in this bat cave anyway?
Guys, welcome back. Hope you had a nice week.
I think we're in a secret location, so nobody can throw pot shots at.
I'm just wondering why the atheist cave here has a window.
It's our light upon the world. We need to see out there, and it's for our own security.
That's right. Absolutely.
Some people out there might want to give us a few bullets our way.
I welcome them.
We'll put you out.
Shot.
We'll put you out in front as our shield, then, Scott.
Guys, welcome back. I guess we're going to do a bit of chit chat. We got a great show today. We'll be talking with Robert M. Price, the Bible Geek. I can't wait for that. That should be very interesting. No, we had Carrier, we had Fitzgerald a few times, and now we have Robert Price.
Wow.
Trifecta is done.
Must have been in another since I've been around forever. Must have been
that other podcast.
It was the other podcast. Oh.
We can't start this week without talking about the elephant in the room, of course, which is the BC election that just happened. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts? So now it turns out that at this point, all the votes have not all been counted, but there are 43 seats that have gone to the Liberals, 41 to the NDP, and 3 to the Green. Yay! And in this legislative assembly, you need 44 seats to win a majority. So now looks like we're going to have a minority Liberal government.
It does. It's interesting that the Greens all of a sudden are the people in power. That part of it, I don't quite understand all of Canadian politics, but I do understand who carries the power in their back pocket, and it seems like the Greens have reached that status.
All of a sudden, Andrew Weaver is the most powerful man in BC politics.
Isn't that something?
And that is a lesson for all the people out there that don't vote. They say, it doesn't change a thing. Yeah, you know what? It just did. Although the voter turnout was only 57%, which is not great. But right there, we know that since you need 44 for a majority, whatever piece of legislature the BC Liberals put forward, if because truly at this point, Andrew Weaver could decide to support the NDP.
Yes,
and you could end up with an NDP government that would form, right? So right now, he's in charge in some weird way.
It's a nail biter.
Yes, and they're still counting some ballots. But anyway, the funny thing is people that have been following the show for a while. One of our very first interview was Adam Olsen, who turned out to be one of the guys that was elected with the Greens this time too. Oh. He was the interim party leader at the time. Mm-hmm. We interviewed him at the time, and it was a nice interview, and a nice fellow. And now all of a sudden, he's an MLA. So that's very interesting.
It is. You ought to have him back now.
Yeah. I'm not going to ask you guys who or what you voted for. Here in Abbotsford, of course, nothing's changed. It remained in the Conservative.
It never changes.
Exactly. It's stayed for the Liberal. For maybe our U.S. listeners out there, because you see BC Liberal doesn't necessarily mean they're Democrats. They're actually the Conservative. They just acquired the name Liberal. So it's actually a conservative government that's most likely going to happen.
I do my
Well,
best
in
to
the
tip
minority.
the balance, but every time I look at the voting results, whoever I voted for is sort of down at the. I think, oh, that's where the intelligent people are. We ought to get together and have a couple of meetings. But of course, it's anonymous. You never know.
I don't know about you guys, but I never ever really vote strategically. I always vote for the person I think that should go in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I know often, 9 out of 10, my vote doesn't really mean squat. And it doesn't really make much of a difference. But
Yes,
you know,
it does.
yes and no. But I sleep at night. You know, I can't bring myself to vote for somebody that I actually don't respect.
Well, you vote your conscience.
I vote my
And
Okay,
you-
wait a minute. You can't bring yourself to vote for somebody you don't respect. When have you met a politician you do respect?
Actually, I usually make a point to go meet the politicians. That's what I usually do. I try my best to go and pick their brain as much as I can. There was actually a while there for the atheist group. We were trying to invite politicians to come and see us because we wanted to show the politicians that atheists are not this little obscure group. There's a fair amount of us. And we were actually a voting bloc. Now, if we could get the atheists to stand together as one, then maybe this would happen.
I think we had two come to our meeting. We had a representative from the Green Party that came quite a while ago, and
We also had the NDP come.
the NDP. That's right. It was a young fellow from the
Preet Rai was his name, and he also ran in this election as well. We had invited the Liberals, but they never even answered.
No,
No.
Erd Flavel came from the
Eric
Green
Flavel.
Party. Yeah.
There's also a couple of small independent guys that came. You know,
Yeah.
we just wanted to show
So-
that atheists are worth courting for as far
Yes.
as voting is concerned. Yeah.
And they both were very respectful, and
Absolutely.
they had good presentations and
Absolutely.
good conversations.
So,
So
maybe
what
we'll do that.
what's the possible outcome now from the fallout from this election?
You'll have to be a bit more specific on your question
Well,
here.
we've got a minority government. What plans are going to be put forward? I'd like to know personally when the government's going to fold.
Well, minority governments do have a bit of a history of folding a bit quicker than not necessarily lasting the 4 years. But this is my personal opinion. It's only worth that much. I think that a lot of people have voter fatigue already about this. And I don't think the Greens are willing to go out there to try to necessarily take out the legs of the next government. They're in a position of power and right now. So if they were to call for another election right now, they might actually lose that advantage.
That's true.
Why would you do such a thing?
However, position of power only means something if you can wield it.
Yes. So I think
If all you can do is warn the government not to go somewhere, and then that vote never happens, because that would lead to a non-confidence, then what power do you actually wield?
Well, I think we're going to see maybe a great big game of chicken there between Andrew Weaver and Christy Clark.
Of course, all of our
Who's gonna call
American
the
listeners are now totally confused.
Yes.
Your task, American listeners, are to look up parliamentary governments, and you will understand what we're talking about, and your world will widen by quite a bit.
Yes, it's not like the U.S. It's not
No.
at all like the U.S. Moving on, Facebook shuts down Atheist Republic.
Wow.
Did
I
you guys
saw
see
that.
that? For supposedly being anti-Muslim. Now, Facebook Atheist Republic group actually is the largest Facebook group of atheists in the world. It has 1.6 million followers. But there's a lot of Muslim groups that are apparently targeting atheist groups all over the place on social media. Personally, I suspect what they call astroturfing. It's where you give bad reviews and you just cry wolf like you've been hurt or whatever. And of course, Facebook is kind of obliged to take a look into it. If enough complaints are lodged and if Facebook suspends the page, other groups have been shut down, like the Arab Atheist Network, that's 23,000 followers, the Radical Atheists Without Borders, Human Atheist, Humanitarian Non-Religious, Arab Atheist Forum Network, and more. Now to the point, there's actually a change.org petition that's being sent to Facebook saying, you know what, you guys need to really start looking into this because this is ridiculous.
Facebook hasn't
Well, they
said anything yet?
They took it off. They put it back on, but it seems to be bouncing off and on. There's been a couple of times now Atheist Republicans was taken off the feed and then put back on.
Well, they need to have a universal policy then for various websites. That obviously, it's at this point it's beyond what they understand.
The funny thing about it is there are actual websites or Facebook groups out there that are actually dedicated to anti-Muslims. There are actual groups out there that do that. Atheist Republic is not one of those. So why would you target Atheist Republic?
That's what I said. Obviously, this is something that they really haven't given a lot of research. They just don't. Maybe, who knows? But they really need to. Maybe the petition, but they need letters written to them explaining what the situation is.
I think I'm glad I'm not on Facebook.
Yeah. So it seems that to me there's a concerted effort from Islamic atheists to shut down atheist groups. Which I can't really blame them in a sense, because you know what, we are probably the biggest threat to their religion.
I have a feeling it's going to turn out well, but it may take some time. But I really have a strong feeling that things will be put to rights by Facebook.
I've got this wonderful story. Did you guys hear the story about this Alberta dinosaur that went on display at the Royal Tyrrell Museum? This is a mummy dinosaur they sort of found. It's exceptionally well preserved out of Fort McMurray, close to Fort McMurray. It was discovered in 2011 by a mining operation, and they finally just now put it on display at the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Drumheller. The skin, the guts are intact. A dinosaur, for those of you who don't know dinosaurs, is one of those. They call them like those tank dinosaurs. They're herbivores. They walk on all four legs. They got this really thick armored skin, spikes and everything. They're cousins of the ankylosaur families.
Okay.
The face, the face, the scales, everything is preserved.
Wow.
They got the front half of the beast, right, and the face remains in a frozen reptilian gaze.
Wow.
They think this animal actually drowned and actually somehow floated at some point and then sank to the bottom of a sea, and then it was quickly buried. And then
what a find.
65 million years later, we find here in the tar sands. And what a find indeed, because you have the guts are intact. Everything's intact in this creature. The look, it's not a skeleton. You actually have the skin and everything. It's a fantastic, I can't wait. Now I have to go do a road trip to the Royal Tyrrell just to see that piece.
Oh,
the
yeah.
pictures are absolutely amazing.
We might have to take a road trip.
We just might have to do that, yeah.
Sounds good to me. I'm packing. As soon as I'm packing, I'm ready.
I'm going to finish on a lighter note. It's a bit of an older story. Did you guys hear about this Easter cross that appeared on Gay Street in Greenwich Village in New York City? There was this big cross, full-size cross, that appeared around Easter. It was chained and locked, and over the next 9 days, the anonymous owner would return and move it and lock it down again. It was a clear anti-gay message.
Right, and Greenwich Village happens to be a place where there are a lot of gay residents and businesses. Yeah.
Well, one of the residents, his name is Mikal Latter, tried to have the authorities remove it, and they didn't really do anything about it. So what they did is they painted it. They painted it rainbow color. I love it. They changed the lock, and they added their own lock, and are now calling it the Love Cross. And they left a message saying, "Sorry you can't move your cross. We added our own love lock and glued both keyholes. The cross now belongs to the street." Boom!
Wow.
That's how you do it.
Isn't that's the way revenge should work?
That is absolutely beautiful. That is how you do it.
Absolutely.
That is gorgeous.
Absolutely.
So I thought it was a good way to finish our little chit-chat.
It is.
So are you ready for this day in history? Or
Well, how about a little Qwack Watch today?
let's do a little Qwack Watch.
This is I think they're all interesting, but
Qwack Watch.
what do I know?
Your Quack Watches always are interesting.
They are. Today's Qwack Watch involves I'll let you decide. There's part quack, part pseudo-science, part space science, part a lot of different things. It's called Radionics. Either of you heard of
Radionics?
Radionics.
I know, it sounds great.
Is that what
doesn't it?
happened to Spider-Man?
Okay, Radionics is a system of alternative medicine based on the supposition that detectable electromagnetic radiation, which is wonderful, detectable electromagnetic radiation emitted by living matter can be interpreted diagnostically and transmitted to treat illness by complex electrical instruments. This I know. Did you understand any of that?
I understood the whole thing.
The whole thing. That everything emits a form of radiation like radio waves. Okay. And those radio waves are radiation waves can be emitted by people in a healthy state and also emitted by people in an unhealthy state. So therefore, they're subject to be diagnosed and changed electronically into healthy waves so that people can be cured of whatever ails them, as they say in Qwack Watch land. So radionics, and the interesting thing about radionics is that this goes way back to the early 1900s. And Albert Abrams was the fellow that developed this. He became a millionaire by leasing radionic machines that he built to people and then teaching them how to use these machines to cure themselves. And they were the ultimate little black Wizard of Oz black boxes with the dials and knobs and all kinds of wonderful things. And so he was going for quite a while. And what he would tell people was that each of the waves had certain energy frequencies moving through their body that would define health. So he would define the health, and then he would bring people back for however many sessions that they needed in order to change their waves into positive energy. You were saying something earlier, Kevin, about your atomic weight or something. When we were kidding, your atomic being 82. Well, that's exactly what Albert Adams would do. He'd say, your rate or your value, is such and such a number. Therefore, you have to have a cancer, you have pleurisy, you have migraine headaches. And so he would diagnose these waves according, he'd give them a rate. Well, he was doing really, really well with this scam, and actually had disciples, and one of his most famous disciples was a chiropractor whose name was Ruth Drown, and she was from Los Angeles, and she had actually worked for the Edison company, so she understood electricity, and she understood how to make little black boxes, and she was also a chiropractor and a disciple of Adams. So she put those three things together: the little black box, radiation waves, and a knowledge of how the body works and so forth. And she, I think, was an actual disciple. I think initially she started out thinking that she was really going to help human beings. So she had a diagnostic machine that she called a radio vision instrument, and then she had her curative little black box that she called a homo vibra ray. Now, of course, if you're a scientific skeptic, you'd know that if it was a homo vibra ray, it had to be good. There's just nothing there. Yep, nothing there that would
like
raise
something
any.
a super villain would invent.
Yeah, and
I want people to picture Ghostbusters and that little machine he held up. That the little wings would come up and.
Yeah, she was in Los Angeles, and so she did two things. She would have sessions for $35 a piece, or she would sell the box for $500 and some odd bucks so that people could cure their families.
Oh, wow.
And she would be able to sell them the box and teach them how to use it. But her diagnostics were so far out that they were actually checked at one point by the American Medical Association at the University of Chicago, and she gave them some samples, and they were so outrageous that they knew it was a scam. And one of the ways that she would diagnose was she'd take a drop of blood on a blotting paper, put it in the diagnostic machine, and whether you were there or not, whether it was a year ago that she got that blood or not, she could tell at a distance or wherever you were from that blood sample, and she could put that blood sample through some of her little rigmarole testing and actually, as she said, get an X-ray picture of what that drop of blood
Really?
came from.
Harry
Oh,
Potter.
she was
Harry Potter could do no better.
Absolutely. So finally, she had treated about 35,000 patients, and the Los Angeles police sent an undercover woman in, supposedly saying that she had 3 children and she wanted the diagnosis. And so when Ruth did the diagnostics on the blood, she said, well, one of them had, this kind of a crippling disease, and this one had this kind of crippling disease, which was really wonderful because the undercover agent had brought blood from a sheep, a turkey, and a chicken. So that's sort of
Your son seems to have a thing with feathers.
some things, So there she went, and she ended up in jail. She died, and then her daughter, who was also a chiropractor, went with her. Now, the interesting thing is, this was back in the 50s and 60s, and you'd think that the little black box would have, because it was a scam, disappeared. Oh no. In Nova
people have
Scotia,
short memories.
as we speak, there is a radionics school.
No.
Yes, and they
In
do
Nova Scotia?
it's the Institute of Canada, the Radionics and Dowsing Institute of Canada.
Oh.
Radionics and
this is-
dowsing?
Dowsing.
Oh
That's
my-
not the dowsing when you take the trees, but the dowsing when you have a crystal or something
Yeah,
like that.
when you're
It's
trying
a
to find
pendulum.
water and stuff
No,
like
no, no. Yeah, but dowsing.
that's one type.
Dowsing, when it has to do with radionics and other types of woo-woo, is a crystal on a pendulum, and you put the pendulum over whatever part of the body that you think is, and whatever way that pendulum goes, that's what the illness is. So you have to be trained to. So the description of the radionics training in Nova Scotia, then they can do this by mail. You send them the money by credit card or whatever. They'll send you the machine and videos on how to be a practitioner. And they say that if you do it, most students find the training sufficiently well organized and comprehensive that they have little need for a tutor. So you know how professional these guys are. So there's one in Nova Scotia. There's an English society in the UK that has to do with radionics, and there are several in the United States. I was just really shocked to find. But the interesting thing to me is that when you talk about waves, radio waves, or radiation emanating from the body, if you just kind of suspend your belief for just a minute, you go right to Star Trek and Bones. Because he's got those little devices, that are able to detect the different waves. So that's Ruth Downs. But one of the interesting things I found is that there's a website called Sniggle, Sniggle, which has to do with skeptics. And the guy who is the head of Sniggle, when he was David Gross, when he was explaining radionics and talking about the Qwacks, he wrote this at the end, and I think it's going to take a minute. But in talking about Qwacks, I think this is significant, and we need to keep this in mind. He says, it's cheap and easy to determine that the apparatus and theory of radionics is complete bunk. The fact is, though, that as a form of faith healing, it does heal some people with remarkable success, and a success that medical science might be unable to match with its techniques. Medicine has long acknowledged that in order to scientifically test the efficacy of a new medicine, for instance, it must be compared to the effects of a placebo, administered with equal solemnity, ritual, and belief. This is because the solemnity and ritual and belief can themselves heal. Establishment medicine often seems to treat this as an inconvenient fog that makes the respectable diagnosis of physical ailments with chemical remedies more difficult. Faith healers, like radionics practitioners, use placebo healing as a technology, intuiting that to master the authoritative trappings of a cure may heal more patients than a conservative and prudent scientific diagnostics and treatment. And he says, in some patients, a placebo cure of their love lives or their terrible commute or rotten landlord, or perhaps more importantly, the treatment by a medical practitioner who agrees that these environmental irritants are to blame, at least in part for the problem, may lead to better results for the patient than all the scientifically proven treatments of scientific medicine. And then he says, I happen to believe in the nostrums and rituals of establishment medicine, and I have no patience for a healer who wants to clear my chakras with chai crystals. But on the other hand, an MD in a white lab coat with a stethoscope can boggle me with equally nonsensical diagnoses and courses of treatment expressed in the language that I respect, even if I don't fully understand, and have confidence in, and I'm sold. So here's some ethical questions for MDs. If you have no idea what's wrong with a patient and don't really know how to proceed or know of no therapy that's likely to promote healing for a particular patient, are you honest with your patient? It's better to honestly confess the limitations of medical knowledge and technique. Or is it better to honestly confess the limitations of medical knowledge and technique, or is it better to put your hard-earned trappings of medical authority to good use in the theatrical creation of a potent placebo cure? Interesting.
Those
Those are good questions indeed.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, Radionics is alive and well, waiting for Bones and Dr. Spock. And who knows, maybe we do emit radiation waves.
Yeah, if your name is Bruce Banner, you do. You're an Incredible Hulk, and you emit gamma radiation. But aside that,
that's right.
We do emit
heat radiation.
We don't emit radiation, but we do have magnetic fields.
We do.
Well, we have iron in our blood.
We do.
Iron is a natural magnetic material. So,
which is why now there are MRIs and PET scans.
To say that you can
CT.
affect your health with radio, I work with radios. For 30 years, I worked with radios. You can't affect your health with radios, other than to give yourself cancer.
Yeah.
What about if I use those fridge magnets and I start putting them strategically all over my body?
They tried that. Wasn't there was a hoo-hoo on that one, too? Or woo.
No, I understand
magnetic therapy?
The body is designed to heal itself in a way. And, medicine is essentially to make it work faster, right? Because otherwise your life might be at risk.
Yeah, but it's interesting that David Gross points out that, doctors have their own form of scientific woo-woo that they say, take this chemical, do that radiation cure and so forth and so on. And sometimes it's just, I don't know what to do with you, so here's a pill.
Sure.
And is that a placebo? Is that really good medicine?
It's a good question.
You have to think of both.
I think a lot of our medicine's not good medicine.
Yeah.
But at the same time...
But it's scientifically based.
Well,
yeah,
no,
it's
but
also
when
the
they
best
give
we
you a
have at this
drug,
point.
Yeah.
when they give you a drug, that drug has been studied and studied and studied, and they know what the effects of that drug are on the body.
Right.
They know what it does to the body.
There's also the issue that you have to remember that I don't think a patient would be happy with the idea of, I have no idea what's wrong with you. I don't think they would take that.
I would actually appreciate a doctor who told me, I have no idea. We're going to send you to a specialist.
Yeah, but even if the specialist says, I have no idea what's wrong with you, then I don't think that's good for the patient. The patient would probably panic, or it could make things worse.
Sure.
Emotional state of the patient.
Well, what's worse, saying, I don't know what's the matter with you, so we're going to have to do some research or send you to a specialist, or saying, yeah, I think it's all in your head, but here's a sugar pill. They're not going to be that blunt. Or they're going to say,
they are. They
take,
did that.
take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning, or let's try this pill.
They did that in Abbotsford. We lost a child and we lost an older lady because they were sent home from the emergency room.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? So it does happen.
It does.
All right.
It does. That's not to say that that we need to think more about the quacks because the medical doctors fail us every now and then. It's just something that ethically you have to keep in mind whether you're going to go with a scientific medicine or alternative.
I worry that the quacks are winning though. The quacks are getting this. People want to believe in them. There's no foundation for what they're believing in. There's no science behind it at all.
Yeah.
And it's very scary that people are placing their lives in the hands of homeopaths and quacks without any scientific foundation behind the remedies that are being proposed and pushed on them. Wow.
I agree.
That's true. And just to play devil's advocate, when you put yourself in the hands of a medical incompetent and follow their advice, and that happens as well.
Quite a lot.
Sometimes you're better off going where you may not get any better, but you're not going to
get worse.
You might, it might relieve some of the stress of being ill. Hard to tell. It's a good discussion. I'd love to have a quack. I'd love to have someone from alternative medicine and a physician on our show and be able to discuss the pros and cons.
That's a tall order.
That's a tall order.
But in the meantime, let's do our segment that we always like, Another Brilliant Moment, brought to you by religion. Last week we discussed briefly how Stephen Fry was in trouble for blasphemy.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to report that Ireland dropped those charges. Because it was just stupid to begin with.
Shouldn't have done it in the first place.
And by the way, Ireland, come on. This law was enacted in 2009. Please, come on. Give it a break. But speaking of blasphemy, did you guys know that there's a politician named Mr. Purnama, and he denied blasphemy and plans to appeal against his sentence? This is the outgoing governor of Jakarta, and he's been jailed for 2 years for blasphemy. After the judge has handed down a sentence that was harsher than expected. His name is Basuki, I'm going to massacre this, Basuki Jahaja Purnama, also known as Ahok. I don't know. He was accused of insulting Islam by referring a verse of the Quran in a campaign speech last year.
Oh.
And kind of want to bring this to the attention of people because, they always talk about, Islam, it's not like it is in Saudi Arabia. Well, you know what? This is Indonesia. They always pop out Indonesia being so progressive. Well, there you go. Blasphemy in Indonesia. So his case was seen as a test of the country's religious tolerance. He's been taken into custody immediately after the verdict was read out, and his deputy will govern Jakarta until the term ends in October.
Well, hopefully Canada's well on its way to get rid of the blasphemy laws that are on the books.
Yeah, he apparently implied that Islamic leaders were trying to trick voters by using a verse in the Quran to argue that Muslims should not vote for non-Muslim leaders. And apparently his remarks, which were widely shared in an edited video, sparked an outrage among the religious hardliners, and then they staged regular large rallies calling for him to face trial. So, there you go.
Ah, yes. So we have what is it?
Apparently it's a progressive Islamic country. Yeah.
Law by mob.
Yeah, exactly. So, there you go. This is supposedly the country, Indonesia, that is so progressive. And
all these religious people called for, I'm sorry, sir, but we have to arrest you and charge you and send you to jail because the mob said so.
Yeah. And for blasphemy, right? For blasphemy. Oh, stupid story. Another story. Speaking of Indonesia, this bastion of progressiveness, apparently, which is Indonesia, a gay couple could be punished with 80 lashes after vigilantes filmed them having sex in Indonesia. Amid international alarm over growing restriction on the country's LGBT community. They would be the first men to be caned for same-sex relations under a new code of Sharia law implemented in Muslim-majority Aceh province.
Who was it that filmed them?
I'm getting to that. The lead prosecutor claimed that the two defendants, aged 20 and 23, had confessed to being in a gay relationship during a court hearing. They were arrested after local vigilantes in the city of Banda Aceh suspected them of being a couple and set out to catch them having sex. So they were stalked.
Those are the guys that should
No. Being gay is way worse. Don't you know?
It's
Well,
a
that's
shame.
true. I was sort of in a fantasy thinking in the ideal situation. Those would be the guys that.
See, I would like to see Canada bring in a movement, legal movement to why can't we extradite these guys here and bring them to Canada instead of letting them face some kind of horrible condition there. Let them come to Canada, provide them with a place to live. Maybe they'll be productive members of society over here because obviously the society they're in is really messed up.
Exactly. So the mobile phone footage circulated online and was used as evidence for the prosecution shows that one of the men naked and visibly distressed as he calls for help on his mobile phone. The second man is seen being repeatedly pushed by another man who is preventing the couple from leaving the rooms as he begs, please, brother, please stop, blah, blah. So these guys are basically following these guys. They sort of catch them in the act, and then they're holding them like a citizen's arrest until they can be...
That's the horrible part. That's the really horrible part of that.
So a panel
story.
of 3 Sharia judges will announce its verdicts next week, with the prosecutor claiming the defendants turned down... This is a good one. The prosecutor claims the defendants turned down the court's offer of a defense lawyer. Sure they did. Sure they did. So the Sharia code allows up to 100 lashes for morality offenses.
Maybe they offered one of the vigilantes as the defense lawyer, so they turned him down.
These offenses, these morality offenses, include homosexual sex, adultery, gambling, drinking alcohol, women who wear tight clothes, or men who skip Friday prayer. Yeah, so apparently Indonesia is this wonderful progressive, and Islam is not at all the problem here. No, what are you talking about?
I mean, this is one of those societies where people who are not in the mainstream just must live in fear every day that they're going to be observed or watched or turned
We're not supposed to bring up Islamophobia. This is all wrong. Well, this is blasphemy.
Yeah, exactly. Now, like I've said many times before, I have no problem with the average Muslim person. I do have a problem with Islam. I really do. And I don't care how much you try to sugarcoat it. It's lipstick on a pig. It's just as bad as Christianity. I can't wait for these religions to die. They need to die for humanity to move forward anyway.
Wow.
So
okay, this is really hitting a depressing note. We got to do something here.
Well, let's do something. Let's go to commercial then, and let's come back with Robert M. Price and the Bible Geek. Stay with us.
If your skepticism is socially conscious and doesn't take itself too seriously, you might like Life, the Universe, and Everything Else.
Great Comfort, his big stumper was literally, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
A lot of the interviews took place in front of a building that said liberal arts. I'm guessing that they're not all science majors.
Life, the Universe, and Everything Else. Available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else. I don't know, Zune? Is that still a thing?
Do you know where Saskatchewan is? Probably not. It's in Canada. If you do, you might know a city named Regina. In Regina, there's a studio. And in that studio, there are, at least once a month, a bunch of skeptical atheist geeks and goofballs who get together to do a podcast. We are the Brainstorm Crew, and we're trying to help spread a bit of reason and critical thinking while still having fun. Never taking things too seriously, but still not accepting everything we're told. We go through different topics, exploring them in depth, and often disagreeing. We try to stick to provable facts, and we never trust a myth. That's why we say we're woo-free since 2013. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or Spreaker under Brainstorm, or check out our website, brainstormblog.net. I can't promise you'll always agree with us, but I can promise you'll have fun listening to us.
Interested in a particular topic? You ever wonder where we find all this information?
The Common Sense Canadian is a forum for critical discussion of the key issues shaping our world today: water, energy, food security, and how we manage our resources to the public benefit while preserving our environment. So go to commonsensecanadian.ca. It's uncommonly sensible.
Every night on television we see satire, we see comedy, we see people poking fun at politicians, at all sorts of things. Why should religion, especially the Muslim religion, why should that be immune from people making fun of it? Not that this is making fun of it, I understand, but even so, why should you think that Islam should be uniquely immune from the things that politicians are not immune from and the rest of us are not immune from? Why are you so privileged in taking offense?
And we're back. And we have online with us Dr. Robert M. Price. He is the host of the Bible Geek. He's a snappy dresser and a snazzy dancer. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Price to the show. Doctor, welcome. Welcome for... I can't even speak.
You know, I think there's a typo there. Instead of dancer, it probably should be stumbler or lurcher. But other than that, then snappy dresser. Well, if you consider pretty much a burlap sack, then dapper. I guess that's me.
Yeah, but you haven't seen us over here behind the microphone either.
That's
So,
right.
by comparison, sir, you are snappy.
At least you're wearing a burlap sack.
That's right.
Well, you couldn't tell the difference. I'm not, but I'm such a slob.
Yeah, this show will now be called the Naked Left of the Valley
That's
Show.
right. I was going to say, at least he's clothed.
Yeah, that's something. Not like the Gerasene demoniac. At least not in that respect.
Dr. Price, you're very well known down south of the 49th. You might not be as well known up here north in Canada. Would you be so kind to give us a Reader's Digest of who Robert M. Price is?
Well, I have worked as a student leader for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship long ago, and I was a devout churchgoer, and I changed my views at one point. I guess probably the hinge was around 1977 when wider reading disabused me of the notions I'd had about the defense of the faith and all of that, and I went on a period of searching and read all kinds of theologians and read about other religions and criticisms of religion, and I emerged as what I guess I still am, a kind of friendly opponent of organized religion and Christianity in particular. I regard all of it as a fascinating creation of the human spirit, and therefore it's lovable and admirable in many ways. I just don't take any of it literally, and so I continue to study it with great fascination, and that's led to my involvement at different times with the Council for Secular Humanism and other outfits, and I have started doing podcasts like the Bible Geek and the Human Bible, and also the Lovecraft Geek, and in all of these I reply to listener questions sent me by email. I've written a whole mess of books, generally issued by small publishers. Books, I guess the biggest publisher would be Prometheus, and with them I've published books like The Incredible Shrinking Son of Man, Deconstructing Jesus, The Paperback Apocalypse, and various others, and then other books with American Atheist Press and Signature Books, Intellectual Press, and they're all generally on the Bible or religion, but I also have published short stories and edited anthologies of horror fiction as well, in the vein of H.P. Lovecraft, and I sort of keep my fingers in all these things, and I write a monthly blog, Zarathustra Speaks, and have a Patreon site and a website with an archive of my stories, sermons, articles, etc. So I'm doing all sorts of stuff.
Goodness gracious. You know, I usually say that, I've said in the past that I thought that Arn Ra was the hardest working man in atheism. I might have to revise that after hearing what you just said here on the show. My goodness, sir.
Well, he's probably still ahead of me as a workaholic. He's an amazing fellow.
Yes. You and I had the pleasure of meeting very briefly at the Imagino Religion a couple of years ago. I gave Robert Price a bottle of Canadian Crown Royal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do remember.
Some of it, anyway.
Yeah, I'm not memorable, but the alcohol was. That's the way I look at it. Well, thank you so much for being on the show with us, Dr. Price. I certainly appreciate that. The genesis of the show was that I was discussing the historicity of Jesus with a Christian one time, and he challenged me by asking me which characters I thought in the Bible were true or were not. He asked me, did I think Paul was a real person? And then I started thinking, exactly which of those characters are fictitious, or do we feel are fictitious, and who else should I ask that question to but Robert M. Price? So this is a very broad question, sir. I guess it will probably take the remainder of the show, but who do you feel in your mind is a character, a real person in the characters of the Bible as compared to the ones that we are probably safe to say they were mythical?
I would say that in the Old Testament, you have several of the kings of Israel and Judah who were very likely historical figures. For instance, there are extra-biblical references to Israel, the northern kingdom, and they call it the house of Omri. I believe that phrase occurs in the Bible as well, named after Omri, a major king. Then names another version of the more familiar Omar. And there must have been several. This is ironic because in many ways these are the least interesting characters in the Bible. But before them, like, it seems to me that Saul, David, and Solomon, for instance, probably were not historical figures. I have my doubts about Jeroboam and Rehoboam, who were right after Solomon. There's the reason for doubting Solomon and David is the stories that deal with them have an awful lot to do with the planning for or the building of the Jerusalem temple, and archaeological evidence, or the lack of it, casts real doubt as to whether there ever was such a structure. And if that goes, Solomon sort of goes with it, because there's no real evidence for that any more than there is for the Exodus, which is one of the reasons that Moses is not to be considered historical. But I'd say nobody before these later kings in the Old Testament, and a few non-Israelite ones, like we know there was a Nebuchadnezzar, we know there was a Belshazzar in Babylon, we know there was Cyrus the Persian, though the Bible sometimes gets wrong who was a king, who was a regent, and all that, but at least they were historical characters. Whether Ezra and Nehemiah, more recent figures, still existed, that's up in the air. They might have existed, but they could just be fictional faces for the group sent by Persia to sort of recreate Jewish religion after the exile. The Maccabees are certainly historical figures. They're mentioned in Josephus's history, and they left enough of a mark that you couldn't really explain the subsequent history without them, and their fight against the Seleucid Empire and so forth. Then when you get into New Testament times, it's pretty clear that Herod the Great existed, though not so clear that the slaughter of the innocents, pretty much the only reason he's mentioned in the Gospels, it was not clear that is historical. It seems to be a rewrite of Josephus the historian's account of the nativity of Moses. And so there was a Herod the Great, but what we read about him, not so sure. Similarly, Herod Antipas and Archelaus are mentioned, and the stories there are a bit less colorful, but there's no reason to doubt they existed. Joseph Caiaphas, the high priest, they found his tomb. We know he existed, but again, the problem is what the Gospels say about these people is highly dubious. The notion that they were having a trial or even a hearing for Jesus on Passover Eve is really absurd. It's like whoever wrote this was not aware that all devout Jews had to be at home on this highest of holy days, and got the high priest in night court. Not likely. And so the character existed. It's much like in some of the Hellenistic novels where actual kings and governors are mentioned, but just like in a historical novel today. And I was watching an episode of The Rifleman the other day, and they had General Sheridan, who was a famous character in the war between the states. Well, he never met the Rifleman because the Rifleman never existed. And so there's that kind of thing, docudramas. Then Pontius Pilate, we certainly know about him from a couple of writers, Philo of Alexandria and, again, Josephus. But everything they tell us about him makes it impossible to believe the central thing the Gospels tell us about him, namely that he was trying his hardest to set Jesus free, but was intimidated into letting Barabbas go and condemning Jesus to the cross. There's no way this guy would have shown clemency and so forth. Then with Jesus, of course, there's the 64,000 denarii question. Did Jesus exist? And of course he might have, but the problem is that, in my opinion, the evidence for him is not as strong. I mean, it might be that most of the Gospels are fictitious anyway, and there could still have been a historical Jesus, just like Pilate. There was a Pilate, but the material about him in the Gospels is unreliable. Could be the same with Jesus, and most critical scholars think that, but I don't. There's no way to know, but it seems to me that there really is no good evidence of Jesus, and just about every story in the Gospels looks to me like it was written up from an Old Testament story with the names changed. Some are less obvious than others, but a good case can be made. The sayings, many of them are anachronistic. There's obviously making Jesus address issues that couldn't have existed in his day, and so forth. So it seems to me that a character who fits the mythic hero archetype of the Buddha, Oedipus, Hercules, and so on, all over the world. He might be historical, but there's no way to tell anymore. Now, that then has an impact on the disciples, so the apostles. Was there a Peter, a John, etc.? Could have been, but there's the closest you can come to that. I mean, virtually nothing is told us about these guys. They're just straight men, and most of them don't even have that role. But Peter, for instance, he pops up quite a bit, but he's always just playing Dr. Watson to Jesus Sherlock Holmes for the benefit of the reader. He'll just to get the point out for the reader, Peter will say, "Gee, Lord, how many times must I forgive my brother?" Is 7? No, you idiot. Not 7, but 70 times 7. So, well, it's just like Dr. Watson. "I say, Holmes, how did you figure that little Sally was the Shropshire Slasher?" Elementary, my dear Watson. It's the same thing. Or the character of Ananda in the Buddhist stories, the loyal but stupid disciple who gives the Buddha a chance to set things straight for the reader's sake. So, most of them, the lists of names don't even quite agree, and the closest I can come to seeing any basis to these guys is I think it's sort of like Madame Blavatsky and the Ascended Masters from whom she pretended to receive secret messages, and it turns out that she had all these exotic names like Kuthumi and Moria El and all these guys that she claimed were Tibetan mystics and so forth. Well, it turns out that they were all sort of puns, and she was talking about people she actually knew, Colonel this and Father that, and she just sort of pumped them up into fictional figures. It's possible that that's what happened in the Gospels, that there may have been some church leader named Matthew or Peter or whatever, and he gets written into this thing to provide clout for him. Oh, yeah, the bishop here was, he knew Jesus, so, you better do what he says. But even that's just speculation. Now, finally, with Paul, there you have an interesting bit, because there is the live possibility that Paul is a title or an epithet, and that however he did exist, and because a lot of things said about him in the book of Acts especially are so similar to things said in Josephus and others about Simon Magus, Simon of Gitta, Simon the Sorcerer, or whatever you want to call him. He's a character in Acts and in Josephus. And I think that F.C. Bauer and Hermann Dettering and others are probably correct that Paul, in quotes, was the same as the Gnostic Simon Magus. And if so, he apparently was a historical character, but there's just no way to know unless there's some really shocking new discovery that could come to light, and maybe it'll happen. You know, maybe somebody will come up with an old manuscript of a letter where somebody says, I happened to be in Nazareth the other day and heard the Rabbi Jesus, who had good things to say. Like, if we found a letter that was old enough and appeared authentic, that alone would be enough to establish that Jesus was a historical figure, and maybe it will turn up, but until it does, I think we really have no evidence, and stories of a man who walks on water, changes water into wine, things like that, these are just obviously legendary. So, I mean, you know, I don't pretend to know that there couldn't be a supernatural. I have no way of knowing if miracles ever happen or not. But if you look at these stories, they're pretty obviously legendary. So, you know, there's slim pickings in terms of historical figures in the Bible, I think.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for them to find Jesus' carpentry tools.
Oh, yeah, well, probably somebody has. There was this great joke series on the radio a number of years ago now when Don Imus, who's, I don't know if he's still on TV or not, but he has been recently, he did some real funny stuff when he was a disc jockey, and he did this shtick where he was Billy Saul Hargis, a kind of a rip-off media evangelist, and he would have all these offers. He'd say, most people know that Jesus worked in the carpenter shop, but what they don't know was that he made several full sets of living room and dining room furniture. And Billy Saul has them here for you at a discount price. And he'd sell tickets to heaven aboard the wings of him. And all that. Well, you know, I wouldn't be surprised. Justin Martyr did actually say in about 150, 175 A.D. that there were some people that still had implements that Jesus had made in the carpenter shop. So, you know, what are the chances of that? Not very high, but there probably is somebody that says they've got Jesus' saw or something.
So, in your answer, Doctor, you were talking about some high priest, the high priest, probably a real character, some minor kings in the Old Testament, and Pontius Pilate, to name just a few. Is it possible that these people were added in the story to give it credibility?
Oh yeah, I think so. In fact, the ones we have, like Herod the Great, Caiaphas, Herod Antipas, and Pontius Pilate, I think that is what happened, that these are attacks trying to affix Jesus to the timeline. And the reason that was necessary was that he hadn't been a historical figure. This fits the otherwise very strange fact that there were Jewish and Christian sources, not a lot of them, that placed Jesus about 100 years earlier and put his crucifixion in the time of King Alexander Jannaeus, one of the Hasmonean kings. And then on the other end of it, you've got Irenaeus, church father in Gaul, writing around 180 A.D., he says Jesus died at around age 50 under the reign of the Emperor Claudius, which is, you know, it's just not the way it is in the New Testament. So how could people make such mistakes like this? It just seems to me that you might have a scenario where Jesus kept getting pushed up in history nearer the day of whatever generation of Christians were talking about him, and this in order to provide clout for the church officials. You didn't want to lengthen the line separating your bishop from Jesus. You wanted to shorten it so that there'd be more of a direct link. And so my theory is that Jesus just kept getting pushed up in history, and finally the date. I mean, if everybody knew he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, where would you get these other guesses? I mean, you're not even going to keep that straight? So it seems to me that there were different guesses at different times, and probably Jesus finally gets attached to this particular time in history, and they stopped there. And that would mean that the connection with Pilate and the others is purely fictitious. We don't know this, right? I mean, I admit this is speculation. The problem is there's not much room for anything other than speculation.
You know, I find it interesting because you're the scholar, so you can tell me. It seems to me that if we go by the chronology of the one that's accepted anyway about Jesus' life and death, he dies around the age of 30-someone, and then there's no real writing. There's a gap in time where nobody talks about him until Paul shows up, right, at about 50 A.D., right? I believe that's about correct?
Supposedly, that's like the mainstream view, but I have views even stranger than the ones I've mentioned. I tend to go along with the so-called Dutch radical school of the 19th and early 20th centuries, who held that none of the Pauline epistles we have are actually by Paul, but are some decades later. And there were different people using his name. I mean, even within the epistles, it says, watch out for spurious letters as if by me. So we know there were such things. It may be that all of them were. And the chronology it's too dependent on the chronology of the Jesus stories. So I'm willing to accept that date for the historical Paul, but it's all pretty iffy.
Well, what I find interesting is if Paul starts to write, and let's accept the chronology just for argument's sake here, and Paul starts to write some 20 years after his supposed death, yet he doesn't mention absolutely nothing of what the other gospel mentioned about Jesus, you know, his birth and who he met and what he was like. This is all that comes much after in Mark. So I find it interesting that, you know, the first writings about Jesus don't really say anything about him.
Yeah, I think that is really damning to the idea of a historical Jesus, because, as you say, you would never guess from the letters of Paul, whoever wrote them, that Jesus was supposed to be an itinerant teacher, an exorcist, a miracle worker and healer. There's really none of that. In fact, there are about two places where Paul says, I say this by the word of the Lord, but in the context, it seems more likely he means he has a prophetic revelation, not a historical quotation. And at any rate, there's no way to determine which it meant. And so, is there really any Pauline picture of Jesus other than that God sent him into the world, he died and rose in unspecified circumstances, and he's at the right hand of God? That's amazingly skimpy. I know there are the appearances mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15, but again, if you don't if you don't read the Gospels in between the lines, you don't really have anything other than somebody in the Old Testament having a vision of God or an angel. It doesn't say that he was a historical character. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think how could he not have mentioned any of that stuff? Because it's very easy to show that if many of the traditions, the sayings, etc., in the Gospels were circulating, as presumably they must have been if Jesus really said them or did those things, they're so relevant to the point addressed in the letter, like taxation, celibacy, even speaking in tongues, and so on. Why would Paul not have settled the issue by saying, well, look, you can say what you want, but the Son of God said this? Enough said. That's the end of that. But he doesn't. Why is that? And occasionally, Paul will say something that sounds kind of like something in the Sermon on the Mount, maybe, but you can't assume he's quoting Jesus, especially since he doesn't say that he is, and surely he would have. Right? It's more likely that people picked up these sayings from the epistles and eventually said, oh, Jesus must have said this, and started peppering the Gospels with these sayings. So yeah, I think that is, and the attempt to explain this away by conservative apologists seems to me just ludicrous. I think James Dunn said that, Paul did know that Jesus had said, let's say, be not overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. Jesus says something like that anyway. And he just thought it would be more effective if he just left it tacit, like, you know what I mean? Or like in the Monty Python skit, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more. That's absurd. That is ridiculous. And it's what else was going on? Well, there was no such material available, or we'd have heard about it. And so mythicists say, yeah, all this stuff was constructed to fill a gap once Jesus was made into a historical figure retroactively, so that the Catholic Church and then the Gnostics alike could say, well, we didn't make this up. It goes back to Jesus. See, here's what he said. People still do that today. So I think that, yeah, I mean, let me be clear, this is not by any means proven, but it makes the most sense to me to say that Jesus was a mythical character, and this is one of the big clues. You're right.
Now, something kind of caught our attention, Nancy and I, because you were talking. You said in your answer earlier on that Jesus addresses issues not of his day. Now, that kind of caught my attention, especially if the character is added on later on. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, one example would be from the Gospel of Thomas, which, of course, didn't make it into the final cut. Example anyway, the disciples asked Jesus, is it profitable to circumcise or not? And Jesus says, if it were, then they would come already circumcised from their mother's womb. Now, is it possible to imagine that in a Palestinian Jewish context, Jews would be raising the question of, is it worthwhile to be circumcised? It's absurd. Nobody would question that. However, if you think about the situation in the Mediterranean world that comes up in 1 Corinthians and in Romans, where you've got a bunch of Gentiles, non-Jewish pagans converting to Christianity, do they have to get circumcised? Do they have to become Jews as well as Christians, so to speak? This is, in fact, the same phrase appears is in Romans. Is circumcision unprofitable then? And then he gives a kind of an evasive answer. Well, so it's pretty obvious that this was attributed to Jesus. Somebody's trying to win an argument. Somebody who was like a Pauline Christian. No, that's not important. It's Jewish identity, and that's fine, but that's not really germane to somebody becoming a Christian. Another one would be the mission charge, so-called Great Commission, at the end of Matthew, where he says, going into all the world, make disciples of the nations, baptizing them, etc., etc. If that's the parting shot of the resurrected Son of God, is it possible to imagine a dispute like in Acts chapter 10 and 11, where the Holy Spirit has to arm twist Peter and say, look, get your butt out of here and go preach the gospel to the Roman centurion Cornelius? And he said, look, I'll do that. I can't associate unclean. He says, hey, in God's eyes, nobody's unclean. Get moving. And so he does, and he's preaching to these Romans, and suddenly the Holy Spirit falls on them and all this. How could he have any doubt if the last thing Jesus had said is get out there and preach to Gentiles? Well, it's obvious that the Great Commission is the product of this debate. Somebody, like the author of Acts, has the Holy Spirit give Peter a vision, but somebody decided to one-up him and have the resurrected Jesus command the mission. And there are other things like that where you have Jesus, or maybe the most glaring of all, in the Gospel of John, in chapter 9, we have the story of the man born blind, healed by Jesus, and he's a big fan of Jesus and gets kicked out of the synagogue for it. And his parents won't even defend him because they're scared they're going to get excommunicated. Well, 7 chapters later, at the Last Supper, Jesus says, the time is coming when they will exclude you from their synagogues and so on. Wait a minute, that time's already here, isn't it? We just saw it happen 7 chapters ago. So even within the same gospel, you have this gross anachronism, and it's not just stupid storytelling. The point is, this is a kind of a wink to the reader to say, this is what we think Jesus would say, addressing this issue in our day. And there are other things like that as well, it seems to me.
Wow, okay. Okay, well, that was a great answer, thank you. But I have another question. As we know the 4 Gospels, everybody knows about them, but I think the vast majority of people out there are not aware of the other Gospels, the ones that didn't make the cut. Why is it, in your estimation, that these Gospels didn't quite make it there?
Well, it's easy to tell why they wouldn't have. Some of them had doctrines that the framers of the canon didn't like the Nag Hammadi documents, the Gnostic library discovered in 1945 in Egypt. A lot of that stuff is really weird stuff, hard to read even in a good translation. It's very mystical and mythical, and they're not even Gospels in the typical sense. They're barely narrative at all, and they're like a press conference between Jesus and his disciples about these esoteric doctrines, like what to say to the angels when your soul is ascending after death, and this and that. Very strange stuff, fascinating, but very strange. Some of them just must have seemed ridiculous, like the infancy Gospels, of which we know of about 3 or 4, where Jesus, it's like Jesus the Menace, I like to call it, where Jesus as a kid is... he's helping his idiot dad in the carpenter shop. Joseph has to make a throne for some local official, and the guy is so inept he can't get the chair legs the same length, and so he's wasting all this wood. Well, Jesus comes in and he says, well, I'll take care of this, and lengthens the chair legs to make them all equal. And Joseph said, well, what a lucky guy I am, and things like that. And other ones where Jesus is out playing with his little buddies on the playground, and one of them runs into him, hits him in the shoulder, and Jesus says to him, you will go no further on your way, and the kid drops dead. Another one, he's on the roof of an abandoned building with his friend Zeno, who falls down and dies, and Jesus has apparently killed so many kids in the neighborhood that the kid's parents assume he pushed him, and so they're accusing him, and Jesus says, look, I didn't push him over. Zeno, come back to life and tell him I didn't kill you. And he does. And so, come on. I mean, it's so ridiculous. They're fascinating, but you can see how there must have been a principle of some things are just too embarrassing. So they're all fascinating, and there were many more that I wish we still had. But I have to admit, I don't think we're missing any gems that, at least from the ones we know about. But except maybe the Gospel of Thomas. That has a lot to say. It's Gnostic, but it's not all that bizarre, and they're really interesting, arresting sayings in that one.
Huh, okay, perfect. Wow, time goes by already real fast. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Price, for all your wisdom and your knowledge here. My God, but the mic is all yours, sir. Be shameless, plug yourself, go right ahead. Where can they find you?
Well, I have a website, Robert M. Price. There's no spaces or anything. Let's see, .mindvendor.com. Mindvendor is MINDVENDOR. Wait a minute, Robert M. Price at mindvendor.com, I guess. Yeah, and that's got all this stuff I've written over the years, and I also am on Patreon, and so I'm sort of always this is an odd predicament to be in. I kind of live on a wing and a prayer, but I don't pray, so I'm just winging it, and I welcome support, and luckily I've got loyal listeners to the Bible Geek and so on, and contributions are appreciated. You can listen to my podcast, The Bible Geek, and if you just Googled it, you'd find it. I can't remember all the .coms and stuff, but in my podcast, The Human Bible, is available only to Patreon patrons. I have books out. I've mentioned a bunch. My latest one out is called Holy Fable, the Old Testament Undistorted by Faith. Ooh. And then, in about 6 months or so, Volume 2, Holy Fable, the New Testament Undistorted by Faith, will be out from Intellectual Press, and it'll be on Amazon. The first one already is. And this is a kind of a brief introduction to and commentary on virtually every book in the Bible and some that didn't make it. So that's a kind of a fun one. That's a recent one I put out was Blaming Jesus for Jehovah, which deals with the question of, can you really let Jesus off the hook as the good cop if Jehovah in the Old Testament was the bad cop commanding genocide? I mean, if you believe in the Trinity, or not they really, tied together? And so that's sort of a harsh polemic, I have to admit. And you could look on Amazon. I got loads of books on there.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure that everybody goes there, and we'll put this in the notes of the show. But before I let you go, Dr. Price, can I get you to say, hi, I'm Robert M. Price, and I took a left at the valley.
I am Robert M. Price, and took a left at the valley, me and the other goats.
And that was Robert M. Price.
That was fascinating.
That was fun.
That was awesome.
That really, being so naive about biblical things, there's a lot I don't know, but his tying things in terms of whether certain things that Jesus said was relevant to the time or was stuck in there to confirm a particular point,
exactly.
A strategy rather than,
And the man is so knowledgeable. All I had to do is ask him a question and just let him go. And he's spewing all this information. And my God. So conclusion, Adam and Eve didn't exist. And seems like King David, there's not much of evidence for that. So the whole Jesus thing really comes into doubt. It's like, come on. Yeah. If he's Adam and Eve, there's no original sin, no reason for Jesus. If there was no King David, then, the whole descendant of David thing kind of falls apart too.
It is, and I really enjoyed, thank you for asking that question, Kevin, about what characters were real and what characters weren't. I was sort of prepared for, a lively but scholarly, but he made it so interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and so we had him and Richard Carrier and David Fitzgerald. We have the trifecta of the mythicists. That's fantastic. So we'll need to bring them back for sure.
Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent.
Good guest. Really good, interesting guest. We ought to invite him back a time or 7 or 8.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
We'll have him back for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for listening to the show. And you can find us on leftofthevalley.com, or you can find us on Facebook, on Twitter at LATV Podcast. You can send us an email at leftofthevalley@outlook.com.
Who's coming up next week?
You know what? I don't even have my schedule. I don't even know. I'm not sure.
A surprise.
I'll be surprised. I'll be surprised. But I do remember that we do have Daryl Ray, and we're also talking with David Smalley of Dogma Debate. Hopefully we can bring him back. We had him once before. Let's bring him back. We want to talk about these tiny thinker books.
Oh, okay.
Little books of science for kids.
Oh,
really? Yeah. Well, it should be fun.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Anything else you guys want to add?
That's about it.
Everybody have a good week.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next week. Until next time.
Perfectly intelligent people can reach the conclusion that all non-believers are evil. What a fucked up statement. Do you realize what you're saying? But according to your book, this is how your God made me. Skeptical of anything that contradicts history, denies pseudo-science promotes mystery. I'd rather see the truth than to bask in my own ignorance. Rather be alone than surrounded by damn idiots. As long as there's a breath in my body, you can bet your last dollar I'll be working hard fighting this problem. Religion is a disease, it comes from culture, only true on a regional scale. Science is universal. Were you to say that Horus isn't real, but Jesus is, or Zeus, Thor, Mithra, Vishnu, you don't believe in them? I think the reason is apparent. You do what you're told and believe in the God assigned by your parents. I'm proud to be an atheist, a skeptic, a non-believer, an infidel, a heathen. I call it how I see it. I say it's ignorance and you just call it faith and unsubstantiated claims. That's something to be ashamed. I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. Now let me take a sec. Don't mean to sound so hateful, but I swear to God, pun intended, I find it disgraceful that thousands of children are raped by priests, and since they're holy men of God, they get away scot-free. And the Pope does his very best to keep it on the hush. Don't wanna affect business, he loves money too much. We know that they love the kids, but how the fuck can we protect them while they planning to molest them? We teaching them to respect them.
Fuck that.
The system is broke down, working backwards, and the only action or tactic I plan to practice now is to attack them. The parties of God's hands are bloodstained, millions of murders by believers, and they're all in God's name. And let me take a sec, don't mean to sound so hateful, but I swear to God, pun intended, I find it disgraceful that many atheists are told to be quiet. You're not alone, speak your mind, time to let it be known. I'm proud to be an atheist, a skeptic, a non-believer, an infidel, a heathen. I call it how I see it. I say it's ignorance and you just call it faith and unsubstantiated claims. That's something to be